Greetings, everyone. This is Davey Gamble for the Be Your Own Boss podcast. This week we have Jeffrey Weber. And just as a information notice, if you're enjoying the value of this video, go ahead and hit the like button, and it helps you find more people on this content. And if you're interested in becoming your own boss, be sure to subscribe and tap the bell to don't miss content that's coming. There's going to be a lot of insightful content on the way. Here we have Jeffrey Weber from JJ&J Investments Group. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeffrey and let him kind of give you a background on where he's from and how he got to be where he's at. Jeffrey?
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. My name is Jeffrey Weber. I was born in New York City in the Bronx. We moved to New Jersey when I was 4 or 5, and I had a great, wonderful childhood. And actually, I'll tell you, that was a fortuitous move for me to move to New Jersey because my dad worked in Manhattan. So he needed an easy way, if you can call it easy, to get from New Jersey to Manhattan. Well, one of the reasons I think my dad moved to Ramsey was there was a major railroad going right through the center of town called the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad. It was the classic 4-track railroad with commuter trains going to and from New Jersey to Manhattan or to Hoboken, New Jersey. And then he'd have to take a subway under the Hudson River to get to Manhattan. And for whatever reason, I fell in love with railroads. I just adored them. I used to root for a big freight train to come along and keep me from school, those kind of deals. Well, long story short, I read everything, and my dad would bring the newspaper home every evening, the New York Journal-American. I still remember it. Well, I read everything. I'm maybe it's part of my Asperger's. I don't know, but I love to read, and I've always loved to read. I checked the stock tables and found out Erie-Lackawanna had a stock, and it was selling for $2.05. Back then, you used fractions for stocks. It wasn't a decimal system. So here I am, 8 years old, and I had accumulated the grand sum of about $350 in my savings account. And deja vu, the savings account was paying about 1.5%, like it's still doing 50 years later. So that's not the way to invest, folks. Okay, so I go up to my dad and I say, and back then you didn't have computers. Commissions were expensive. And so I asked my dad, I said, plus I didn't think you could even buy odd lots, So I asked my dad, I said, hey, Dad, I have $350. The stock only costs $2.62. I can buy 100 shares of the stock for $262. Well, unfortunately, my dad had grown up during the Great Depression in the 1930s. And so he had done the exact wrong thing of hated the stock market and never bought a share of stock in his life, which hurt our family and us because he missed out on one of the greatest economic booms in history. And so that made an impression on me. So I nagged my dad to buy me the stock. He refused. I finally gave up. I'm 8 years old. Well, I go down to our basement in December of 1955, and my dad had bought me a model train set and set it up overnight. Great dad, believe me, and had set up the trains on the ping pong table. I was floored. It's the greatest Christmas I ever had in my life. Well, it wasn't over yet. I go to my Christmas stocking, and somehow my dad had managed to buy me 5 shares of Erie-Lackawanna stock at 2 5/8. How he did that, I never found out. But okay, you know, better than nothing. Well, long story short, the following August, 8 months later, the Penn Central Railroad bought the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad and redeemed every share of Erie stock for $16.
Wow.
So I got a check for $80 for my 5 shares. I was thrilled, but I'm thinking to myself, even at the tender age of 8, if my dad had let me buy 100 shares, I would have gotten a check for $1,600, which is
Oh, wow.
all the money in the world to a struggling, 8-year-old in 1955.
Yeah, you'd be rich.
Yeah, but he planted the thought in my brain that investing was the way to go, and that I was not going to be like my dad and ignore the reality that the stock market can really make you large gains. So my dad might have done me a favor by not buying me those 100 shares, because he literally branded in my brain that investing was the way to go. And ever since then, I've been looking for the way to invest. Well, story moves along. I shocked my parents because I'd never been further west than Philadelphia from New Jersey, and decided to go to college at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Arizona. And
Why? I mean,
and again, it has to do with the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad and
really?
incredible luck.
The
Get
train
this.
ended there?
I Here, believe this or not. Okay, this is amazing. It's true. I swear it's true. I was in the Ramsey Library one day. I'm looking at the
And the Ramsey Library is where?
in Ramsey, New Jersey.
Okay.
This is a town of maybe 7,000 people at the time.
At the time, right.
Okay. So I go in there, and of course, I love model trains as well as big trains. I look on the magazine rack and I see this issue of Railroad Model Craftsman magazine for model train enthusiasts. So, of course, I want to look at it. Well, I read everything. And believe it or not, I find out that Railroad Model Craftsman is published in Ramsey, New Jersey. Believe it or not. And their office was literally next to the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad tracks, right through the center of town.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'm in high school at the time. I get the brilliant idea, I'm going to go over there and see if I can get a job with them. And they hired me as the after-school shipping clerk when I was like 16 years old. The story gets better. Why did I go to the University of Arizona? Because it turns out the magazine was owned by this eccentric millionaire named Charles Penn, who owned the ghost town of Bumblebee, Arizona, near Phoenix. Oh, and Hal Carstens, who was the editor of the magazine, drove all the way out from Ramsey, New Jersey to Bumblebee, Arizona to visit Mr. Penn. And he came back with all these pictures of Arizona and cactus and everything else. And I absolutely fell in love with it and vowed I was going to go to college in Arizona.
Interesting.
So I looked at the catalogs, chose the University of Arizona, and shocked everybody by going to college there.
Wow.
Well, that helped me too, because I had a great roommate who also liked to read a lot with me. And we used to haunt this used bookstore called Kerber's in Tucson. And whenever we'd go in there, I'll confess, we'd always buy a few Playboys, but I'd also look at the investing section,
Right.
and I found the book on Robert Lucillo had written about AIM investing. And
we could put a note in the comments for that. So
okay.
For the audience.
And then I didn't do anything with it because I'm going to college. I didn't have any money, to invest, blah, blah, blah. Long story short. Well, finally, about 8, 9 years later, after I had transferred to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I get a degree in accounting. And then through, good fortune, I got hired by the U.S. Army to be an auditor. And I used to kid people and say, if you love fraud, waste, and abuse, you want to work for the U.S. Army. It's like catching fish in a barrel. I would stumble over $1 million findings of fraud, waste, and abuse constantly. That's another story. Okay. So here I am in roughly 1979, or about 1983, 84. 50 years ago? God, time flies. Okay. And I finally decide it's time to get serious about investing because I'm now married to, get this, my wife is a mail order bride from the Philippines that I found in a magazine ad in Tucson, Arizona.
Wow.
When I first met her, it was BC, before computers. You didn't have dating websites, things like that back in the early 1980s. So it turned out her friend had put her in the ad. So 1 billion to 1 shot, and I hit the 1 billion to 1 shot. The magazine was in my hometown, another 1 billion to 1 shot. Happened to be owned by a guy who's an eccentric millionaire in Tucson, in Bumblebee, Arizona.
Right.
And why the editing and publication was done in New Jersey, I'll never know. So I had a lot of great coincidences that helped me into my investing career. So finally, I get to Michigan. Okay.
What takes you to Michigan?
Just north of 8 Mile Road, famous by Eminem.
Oh, no. I mean, what drove you to, not necessarily drove you, what made you want to go to Michigan?
The fact that I would be unemployed and my GI Bill benefits had run out. And if I didn't take that job, I was going to starve.
Oh, okay. So it was a job.
So I didn't want to go to Michigan, but I had to get started with the government. Plus, here's another incredible benefit I got. I got hired. I started work the first day of spring, March 21st, 1983. 1983 was the last year the federal government offered new employees a defined benefit pension plan. They told me, Jeff, you come to work for us, we'll give you 2% times the number of years you work for us at your average of your highest 3-year salary. So my highest average salary was $100,000 back then, good money. I had incredible benefits. And get this, because I signed up for it was called CSRS, Civil Service Retirement System. Because I signed up for it, I didn't have to pay Social Security while I worked for the U.S. Army and paid into my own pension. So even now, to this day, 15 or 20% of my pension is tax-free because it's a return of my own money.
Oh, yeah.
So, that's very, very nice. So
yeah, you don't get those anymore.
One reason I got interested in AIM investing, because I could see that everybody who had an ordinary job was going to get screwed because they weren't going to have any money to retire with, when they did retire. And so I quickly viewed AIM, after I learned it, as the ideal way to replace the pension that you'll never get. Because 401ks, I'm sorry, folks, if you'd ever lived with a pension, you wouldn't touch a 401k if you had a choice.
Well, yeah, a lot of companies nowadays, they've ditched the pensions because they didn't want to take on the responsibility.
Everybody started doing it.
Yeah.
Okay, so my story continues. How did I learn AIM? Well, like I said earlier, AIM investing was written by and invented by a wonderful gentleman named Robert Lucillo, who wrote a book called How to Make $1 Million Automatically. So that attracted my attention, because back when he wrote it, $1 million was actually a lot of money. I actually have one investor right now who has a total portfolio worth 2.4 million, but it's not as if he had it 50 years ago, when it was
Right.
more like 5 or 6 million. So
you're in 1983. When did you start using AIM at that point?
yes, I started here's how I learned AIM, because remember, like I told you, BC before computers. And actually, I couldn't really do it in Korea because it was too hard to trade back then in 1983 before computers.
Right. How long were you in Korea?
I was in there 4 years.
4 years. Okay.
I actually got to see some of the Olympics in 1988.
Oh, wow.
That was pretty impressive. Okay, so how did I learn AIM? Well, another break came my way. Because I worked for the Army Audit Agency as an auditor, I had access to 16-column accounting paper, because we didn't have Excel or computers to do auditing back then. We had to do it on paper.
Manually, right.
So I liberated about 60 or 70 sheets of paper, took it home, and I also had been smart, because I just deep down knew I was going to do AIM eventually. So I had been saving one issue of my Barron's for the last 3 years. And when I read Lucillo's book, I noticed, I have an amazing ability to improve something that somebody else has done. I could immediately see from reading his book, I could improve on several things that he did. But the system itself was absolutely brilliant. I couldn't improve on that at the time. I did later on. So what did I do? I looked up 60 stocks, because back then I only knew about stocks to look at. I looked up 60 stocks, wrote just the price in the price column that he had on his sheet, out of the other 13 columns. And that's all I needed was the price. And I pretended I started each one. And the way you do AIM, if you start with 10,000, you're going to buy 5,000 worth of stock and put 5,000 into cash. And the cash is there. If the price goes down a certain amount, you're going to buy more. And if the price goes up a certain amount, you're going to sell some. Okay.
Right.
So I did that with 60 stocks, and I immediately started seeing patterns. And I'll tell you one story that I remember to this day vividly, because it was so incredible to me. I did this one stock called Campbell Resources. It started off at $6.40. I'm only looking up the price once a month. That's all, all I could stomach. And I thought that was a good test, because that's what Lucillo said, look them up once a month. And in 3 years, that stock went from $6.40 to $2.80. Okay. But by doing AIM on that stock for 3 years, the lump sum investor would have been down 68% from 640 to 280. Me, the AIM investor, I was up 38%, believe it or not. And I figured out why, because that bugged me, because Lucillo never explained that AIM is a sophisticated dollar cost averaging system with buying and selling. So that's why it works so well. Well, the reason I was able to make those kind of profits, there was a 3-month stretch on Campbell Resources where the price went below $1 to 285, to 85 cents to 90 cents, 95 cents in that 3-month period. The very next month, after those 3 months, and AIM had bought thousands and thousands of shares because I didn't have a bear buy strategy back then. I have added that since. And I said, so suddenly I'm buying 4,000 shares, despite the fact I had been starting with, 350 shares, we'll say, on it to begin with. Well, get this, the fourth month, the stock went from 90 cents to $2.40. AIM gave me a sell for 13,000 shares because it was selling the shares we had bought at 90 cents, 95 cents, and 85 cents. And so I did I figured out, I said, here's the way I'm going to figure this out. I took a spreadsheet and I made a column and I put down all of the buys. Then I made another column and put down all of the sells. And I figured out that my average buy price was $1.19. My average sell price was $1.90. And I had sold 13,000 shares and made like 85, 90 cents times 13,000, among other things. So it proved to me that AIM would work and I was going to work on it. Now, the other thing I immediately determined that the way he was figuring out whether you had to buy or sell was wrong every month, because I agreed with him that 10 is the ideal number to own, 10 different investments. But he would lump them all together and decide, well, let's say you started with 30,000, whatever, for example, right, and it went up to 35,000 a month later. So AIM would be telling you had a $5,000 sell. Now, what he did, which was smart, he came up with a factor called SAFE, which is always equal to 10% of the value of your portfolio. So if you had 5,000 sell advice, he would have subtracted 3,500, 10% of the value of the portfolio, and told you have a market order for 1,500. And then his idea was just sell any one of the 10. And I thought, well, that's wrong. So I immediately decided I was going to write my own book on him, and make some changes. And the first thing I changed was I gave every investment its own spreadsheet. So that way, if you had 10, maybe 3 had to buy, 2 had to sell, and 5 you would do nothing with because they didn't go up or down enough.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. So let's go along the lines of, how long did that process take for you to figure out AIM, and when did you really, start implementing it? Was it immediately?
Okay.
Or
I
did
started
it take a little
implementing
bit?
it when I got back to America and started working at Fort Sam Houston as the internal review auditor for the Army. Because by then, computers had come along and I was able to trade online. So I started trading online about early 1990s. Right, because I bought my house in 95 when I came back because I went to Germany again for another tour and I couldn't trade when I was over there. But I've been writing my newsletter for 33 years. So I wrote my newsletter and published it the best I can. I used to mail it to people in the old days. So I've been writing a newsletter for 32 years.
So you did it in what, 97?
Yeah, about 97, 98.
So from 83 to like 97, you're kind of like trying to understand it and trying to
understand
put it into play.
Yes, and trying to improve it.
Right.
And so I basically, the very first book I wrote, which I give away for free, so anybody who wants it, I'd be glad to send them a copy, is worked on for 20 years. And it didn't really take off because I had a lot of people used to tell me, well, I like the AIM concept, but it doesn't work with stocks because I never get a buy or sell because they're not volatile enough.
Right.
And then another break. I went while I was here in San Antonio. Somebody held a free 3-day financial seminar, and that's where I learned about LEAPs, the long-term options.
Right.
That was
So
the
when did,
magic breakthrough.
yeah. So when did you leave the Army?
I retired about 10 years ago.
So you retired in 2015?
See, I was a civilian employee, not a military employee.
Well, I mean, yeah, you were a
I
government
retired
employee.
at 68
You retired as a government employee in 20.
as a government employee and 10 years ago, and started getting my pension.
Right.
And then I had more time to do it and work on it. And I wrote 3 other books, that I even, and then I, improved my newsletter. I think I sent you a copy. You should have seen it. And I'm always learning and realize that AIM is limitless and can do many more things. And I had one of my investors show me leveraged ETFs about 4 months ago when Dirixian came out with them. And I thought they were the absolutely perfect vehicle, because right now I'm telling people only buy leveraged ETFs and wait for the 2018 LEAPs to come out, which will come out next week. So,
Well, the list comes out next week, right? You said
right.
that the actual transition is in January sometime, right?
Well, I've
Or can you get
changed
the
my
leap?
attitude on that. And what I do now is this: anybody who owns a 27 LEAP and it's the slightest bit profitable, I tell them, let's sell it, book that profit. Now you have a little more money. Let's buy a 2028 same stock, and we'll adjust the strike price to suit buying a minimum of 15 contracts, which I recommend.
Okay. I mean, we're coming down to the end here, so I wanted to kind of wrap it up. So
Sure.
can you kind of give me, where do you see this and how are you, you mentioned your books. We'll give a link to the individual, to the viewers in the comments to your website.
Right.
And to get in touch with you if they want to invest or they want to invest with you and get
Right.
more
And I do
information.
help people get started and manage their accounts and teach them the tricks. And I have also developed 2 courses, and I will give people my original course for free if they contact me.
Sounds good.
5-hour
So-
course on AIM investing.
Is there any final things you want to say before I kind of
Yeah.
wrap it up?
I'm going to be hosting a webinar a week from today on September 20th. You can sign up real easy by going to my website, jjjinvesting.com. And I'm going to be talking about the 28 LEAPs and the leveraged ETFs in about a 1-hour session that will also have a recording on. So if you can't watch it live, you'll be able to watch the recording.
Sounds good, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
I appreciate
And,
you having me on your
appreciate,
show, Dave.
No problem. Thank you very much. And everybody else, stay tuned for our next content. And I appreciate everybody's attendance, and we'll see you next time.